Okay. Ahmad from Egypt. I'm head of breeding and genetics department, Sugar Crops Research Institute, Ministry of Agriculture, Egypt. I know we have a tight time, so I will start directly. I will be speaking about cultivating stevia under desert conditions, and I think Egypt was the first country in the world that started cultivating stevia in sandy soils. We started our work since 1993, so we have a very good experience with this. Okay, this first is talk a little bit about stevia. Stevia is a perennial leafy green plant that contains non-calorie sweeteners, which is called stevicides. The word stevicide is representing more than one sweetener inside the plant. This was our very first trials in Egypt. This photo was taken in 1993.
This photo was taken in 1993. This was our first trials on stevia in Egypt. Okay, I'll talk very fast about the benefits of stevia. Stevia, of course, as you know, is a non-calorie and it is natural. It is a pH and heat stable up to 200 centigrades. Flavor enhancer, does not affect blood sugar levels. Plaque retardant, non-toxic and non-addictive sweetener, non-fermentative and non-discoloring bactericidal activity, and patent is 250 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, and it has various medicinal uses. Stevia is usually in the market as stevia leaves, and stevia leaves, whether it is fresh leaves or tea-cut leaves, or as dried leaves, and usually ground leaves. There is liquid extracts, there is dark extracts, and there is clear extracts dissolved in water or in alcohol, and sometimes in glycerin. Stevia extracts, we have many kinds of extracts. Actually, it depends on whether you are working with the American characters or the European characters. In the United States, the FDA requires riboside A, 95% at least of purity. In Europe, the requirements are usually total steviol glycosides with at least 90% of purity. The positive effects of stevia cultivation, it compensates the sugar gap in many countries. I know in India don't have sugar gap because you export sugar, but in a country like Egypt, almost 1/3 of our consumption of sugar is imported. So in this case, it is very important to us to bridge the gap of sugar consumption. Also, it is a water conservation to cultivate stevia, since 1 hectare of stevia can produce much more sweetening power than 1 acre of sugarcane or sugar beet. Also, we are increasing land productivity, since if we are cultivating stevia, we can compensate a larger area of sugar beet or sugar cane, so we can use this area in cultivating other crops. Magnifying Egyptian sources for sweetener production. Most of sweeteners in Egypt are imported, and stevia is a solution to produce a locally produced sweetener. A source of increasing national income, stevia is a good source for exporting sweeteners, which is a good source for hard currency. Also increasing public health level of Egyptian citizens. Almost 15% of Egyptians are diabetic, and we are in a very good need for a healthier sweetener in Egypt. Stevia extraction does not generate any toxic wastes or pollutes. And this is a very important point, especially in the recent years, because pollution now in Egypt is making one real obstacles in many industries. For stevia varieties, in the beginning we started with one variety, and varieties 20 years ago was concentrating on the total sweetening of leaves. So the total sweeteners in leaves were maybe sometimes 18, maybe 20%, but the riboside A was usually not more than 2 or 3%. With time, the whole world started concentrating on riboside A, since it is approved by the FDA and also is closer to sugar, to normal sugar. And with time, and now recent varieties, riboside A can reach up to maybe 12% of on the basis of leaves dry weight. Usually it is maybe 7, 8, 9%, beginning from 7% of riboside A on the basis of leaves dry weight. We can say this is economical to extract. In Egypt, we have 7 varieties, and among these varieties, we have one Egyptian variety. It is very promising. It is under registration now. It is doing very well under Egyptian conditions and under sandy soil conditions. I can see this variety is going to do very well. I'm not sure about its behavior under other conditions outside Egypt, but we can try this after registering the new variety. What does stevia need to be cultivated? Stevia is doing very well with a lot of sunshine and, let's say, moderately high temperatures. But when temperatures reach over 40 degrees, stevia starts to have wilting leaves, especially in the lower third of the plant. So sometimes we cultivate corn between rows of stevia to make some shade in places where temperatures are over 40 degrees in the summer. Stevia is sensitive to salinity, so I don't recommend to cultivate stevia if your irrigation water has more than 1,000 parts per million of salinity. And it is better if you can cultivate it with a water with less salinity. But since we are talking about cultivating stevia in the desert, usually the underground water in the desert is saline. So we choose an area with a salinity that does not exceed 1,000 parts per million. For soil pH, stevia originated in areas where rain is very heavy most of the year, on the mountains, in the area between Brazil and Uruguay. So in these conditions, the soil is usually has a very low pH. But with our trials, we can say that stevia can grow in a very broad levels of pH. I cultivated stevia on a pH 8, and it was still doing very well. However, when the pH is very high, we usually use sulfuric acid or phosphoric acid with irrigation. This will lower your pH in the soil. And this is very important because most of the desert areas has a very high pH for soil. For soil types, stevia can grow in most of soil types, but in calcareous soils, it doesn't do very well. It will still grow, still be economical, but it doesn't give the yield we intended to have. In desert lands, of course, the soil doesn't have any nutrients in the soil, so we start with adding compost to the soil, usually 6 to 7 tons of compost to the land, along with agricultural gypsum to lower the pH and control the salinity in the soil. However, if the water is not saline and the soil is saline, after a while of irrigation, the soil pH will get lower. So the more important is the irrigation water pH more than the soil pH. In all conditions, we in the beginning I started growing stevia on rows, but if you are using sprinkler irrigation, this will make some erosion of the rows around the stevia roots, and finally the root can be outside the soil and heavily affected by the air. For stevia propagation, this is very important actually, because when you speaking about cultivating stevia, 1 acre of stevia will take around 30,000 plants. And in this case, you have to choose what way of or what type of propagation you are going to use. I know that many stevia experts do not recommend using seeds for cultivation, but since all varieties of stevia are open pollinated varieties, and if you have only one variety, I don't see why can't I use seeds for propagating stevia. Of course, there will be some variation between plants, but as a total, it will still give you the same average yield for the same variety. However, stem cuttings are still doing very well, and also root separation. Root separation, it will be very good, especially in sandy soils, because in sandy soils you will have a bigger root system, and then you can separate one plant root into maybe 10 or 15 plants. And of course, it needs a little bit experience, because each part of the root must have 2 or 3 sprouts that will grow new stems from these roots. Tissue cultures, it depends on what country are you living in. In countries where tissue culture is not expensive, tissue culture is a wonderful way to propagate stevia. I have been in many countries, and the price is affecting the whole thing if you can make the decision of using tissue culture or not. Sometimes it is maybe 4 or 5 cents. Sometimes it can reach 20 cents per plant. So the price will affect very much your decision if you are going to use tissue culture or not for cultivating stevia. Um, we have different types of seed nurseries. I will try to go through it very fast. This was a nursery I made in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia, and it was doing very well. In Cambodia, they do not have winter, so I only use the plastic net. Here are the seedlings after 3 weeks of planting the seeds. This is another type of stevia nursery. Uh, in this greenhouse, it has a cooling system, so we can cultivate seeds almost all year round. In the winter, we do not use the cooling system, and in the summer, we start using cooling system. So the degree inside the greenhouse is around 27 degrees, and I have been cultivating seeds almost all year round. This is another type of nurseries. Here I cover the newly planted seeds with papers. This can maintain the humidity around seeds for longer period of times, and it gives a better germination. Here are these plantlets are around 40-day old. Here, these are the stem cuttings. First thing, you have to choose a healthy plant. Then you have to decrease the number of leaves where you're cut. Usually, your cutting is around 10 to 15 centimeters. And then we use the indole butyric acid. We soak the new cuttings into indole butyric acid for around 20 minutes. And then we start putting the new cuttings into the soil. It is very important that I make a very good bed for the cuttings. Here I add bitmoss and compost, and usually I use for one greenhouse I use 2 or 3 tons of compost, so I can imitate the clay soil, because if I cultivate the cuttings only in sand, the rooting percentage is not going to be that good. Okay, these are more photos. For transplanting, this is the next step of cultivating stevia. Whether you, if your nursery is away from the place you are going to cultivate your plants, then you have first to transplant your seedlings into small plastic bags and then transported into your land. If not, you can use the plants directly after taking it off from the nursery. Here are plants cultivated under the pivot system. Stevia can do very well under pivot system, under drip irrigation, under sprinkler irrigation. And in clay soil, we can use all kinds of irrigation. For yield and harvesting, stevia usually gives around 2 tons of dry leaves per year. This is under Egyptian conditions in sandy soils. We have four cuts per year. In the winter, we use this cut only for having seeds, and the other 3 cuts are for leaves. This is a trial we have with the Egyptian army in their farms, and this is when they were cutting The stevia, this is the harvesting. These are seeds newly harvested from plants. And these are leaves after drying. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for adding a new dimension, especially cultivation in deserted area. So I'll be happy to know if have you calculated any, I mean, cost benefit ratio like that. What kind of investment you have done and how much return you are getting? Because your cost must be very high, especially for different kind of facility might have been, given as input.
Yes, of course. Yes, I have the whole feasibility study under Egyptian conditions. Um, uh, Under Egyptian conditions, let me say, I will have around 2 tons of dry leaves per year. In Egypt, 1 ton is equal $3,000 American dollars. So we are talking about $6,000. The whole year cultivation will cost me around $1,500. So it is still giving a very good profit to the farmer. If you need more details, I can send you more details.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.